My name is Bibi van der Zee. I am on the environment desk at The Guardian. I've been writing and reporting and editing stories about climate change for since the last century. And yes, it's great to see the growing interest and the growing change around the subject. So this panel today, we're going to be talking about the impacts of climate change. When I started looking at this subject, it was a kind of hypothetical issue, and the impacts were just kind of, part of the challenge of telling the story was, how do you make people think about this thing which is in the future? Sadly, we've now moved into a place where the impacts are everywhere. We can all see them around us. A lot of people are living with those impacts. So as journalists, that obviously makes our job horribly easier, but it remains the big issue of reporting climate change. How do you bring this gigantic issue home to people? How do you make people understand what is happening and what is going to increasingly be happening? So we're going to look at a range of ways in which journalists have chosen to do this. Obviously, as a journalist, you're always going from the micro to the macro. You're always trying to use concrete, interesting, fascinating stories that will illustrate this gigantic theme that we're all wrestling with. We've got an amazing panel. We've got Ryan McNeil. He's the London-based deputy editor for the Reuters data journalism team, and he's going to look at how we can use data and satellite images. Frederick Majura is a journalist with Water Journal, and he's the founder of Water Journalists Africa, a really fascinating network of journalists. And Shamsuddin Ilyas from the Business Standard in Bangladesh, who's going to be talking about actually on the ground, reporting from the ground, using those experiences of day-to-day impacts of climate change to tell the story. Ryan's going to start.
Hello? Okay. Oh, wow, I misspelled data journalism. That's really embarrassing. Wow. Sorry. So, by way of background, I'm a generalist. I tend to work on a variety of different projects, generally focused anywhere across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And it just so happens that I have done some climate-related reporting, mainly with my frequent collaborator, Deb Nelson, who's in the audience. And I was thinking about, we were just talking this week about the series we did in 2014 about sea level rise. And originally I was going to talk about this, and I thought, things have changed in terms of the available data so much since 2014. Like, I would have done this story completely different. And so I decided that I think it would be a better use to talk about a series that we published earlier this year, which was about the ways that humans are increasing the risk of zoonotic spillover. It is very much an environment story. It is very much a climate story. And I think what I learned from this series, which took us nearly 2.5, 3 years to finish, was can be applied to, I think, just about any climate-related story. So I'm not going to go too deep into the science and the reasons why we did the story and things like that. Deb's going to talk about that actually in the next session on pandemics. But I want to give you a quick little background just so you can kind of understand where I'm coming from. When we were in the height of the pandemic, I was helping cover the UK government's failures to respond to the to COVID, and Deb had been asked to look into the origins of COVID, which, as it turns out, she realized pretty quickly that we may never know exactly how COVID-19 emerged. But we started thinking about the next one, and she started sending me. She can surf the academic literature like a surfer on, in a world-class wave. And she started sending me these academic papers that were, there was a growing amount of evidence linking habitat disruption and land use change to increased risk of zoonotic spillover. And we thought, what if we were to use past spillovers? Could we use that to identify, one, the other places in the world that are also at risk, and two, who's responsible? And, there had been some media coverage of this sort of growing body of evidence, but it always just kind of waved its hand and said, well, this is happening. It's happening here. Well, where specifically is it happening? Who is responsible? And so that's what, and how the risk had changed over the years. And so that's what led to this series. And so basically, this was my collaborator, Alison Martel. We identified 95 spillovers that had occurred between 2002 and 2020. And we mapped those, we geocoded them, et cetera, et cetera. And then we divided nearly the entire land surface of the Earth, except for Antarctica, into 25 square kilometer areas. And then we assembled this massive covariate set, and most of them were derived from satellites, things like land surface temperatures, deforestation, land use, precipitation, vegetation indices, things like that. And so what the model did was it first said, okay, I'm going to look at the environmental conditions around these past spillovers, and then I'm going to take all this data you've created for the rest of the world from 2002 to 2020, and each year I'm going to try and tell you sort of the level of similarity to this body of past spillovers. So we had to figure out how to get from an academic exercise. We had identified all these areas, and we had the output, which was basically a 0 to 1, 0 to 100, right, which was basically an environmental similarity score. And you could see we had to figure out how to turn it from, how to tell stories. So first we had to identify, what are the areas that are most at risk? And if you see this chart over here, all the little dots at the bottom are basically the past spillovers and how their risk score, where their risk score was. And then what we did was every one of these, this is actually made up of every pixel for every year. And so basically we concentrated on the 95th percentile, these areas that are at the far right. And we called those jump zones. And so how we started to turn it into a story was, the first thing we wanted to know was, well, how many people live in these high-risk areas? And if you've ever covered a place outside where census data is either non-existent or infrequent, that can be a problem. But now there's the World Pop program, which I want to highlight here, which has basically attempts to use satellite imagery and other covariates to basically estimate populations down to a 100-meter area. And so this is really great because, whatever you're covering, a hurricane area, a flood, a fire, you want to know who's at risk. And maybe it's in a place where you don't have great census data. Well, World Pop comes along, right? And, they try to, I won't get too much into it. I mean, it is an estimate, and there are little, sort of variations, and you have to kind of watch out for that. But as a whole, it's certainly better than what we had before, which was nothing. And I'm a big fan of it in helping us sort of, and if you're covering disasters in a place, this is a great data set to turn to. I'll skip this just to speed along. And so the next thing I wanted to mention, is that this is very much a story, like climate change, about sort of this battle between the global economic system and the environment, right? And so in West Africa, we focused on the role of mining and habitat disruption. And one of the things I learned is that many African countries now have mining cadastrals that are published online, and it so happens that many of them use this company Trimble to make their portals. So I put a little short little R code later on that you can grab, and basically you can, because it's in a web portal and you want to get it out. And so basically if you code one, you can do dozens of countries and extract the data and have the geographic data and do analyses with it. And so this is how we kind of looked at those things together, the jump zones versus the mining areas. And you could see that it just so happens that, many of the highest risk areas also happen to intersect with where a lot of wealth is located. And so that's kind of this battle between, economic development and the risk of another pandemic. Here's a little code you can grab. You can use this, point it at any of those portals, it'll work. And so this is how we were able to use that concession data, for example. We concentrated on mining giant ArcelorMittal's expansion in Liberia. And so we were able to look at the tree loss that had occurred. We were able to look at how the risk, according to our model, had changed over time. And so having this kind of data allows you to kind of see what's happening within these mining concessions and know who is responsible, because it comes with, here's the company, here's the metal that they're looking for, that kind of thing. I think everybody's probably familiar with Google Earth Pro, but I just want to bring it up again if you don't. It's a really valuable tool. It was really critical to us. One of the things that we really faced a lot was, because it was COVID, was travel and getting visas. And so, we needed to be efficient in our reporting trips. And, Google Earth Pro gives you timeline access to fairly high resolution imagery. And, that allowed us to sort of plan where we were going to go. It allowed me to guide our reporters on the ground when Deb went to Kerala, when we went to Liberia, when we went to Ghana. It allowed us to go to very specific areas. And we also used it to look around how just the very simple analysis of how the neighborhood around one of the NEPA index cases had changed over time. And then one story I really like to talk about is when we focused on Yunnan province in northern Laos. It was a very, very, it was a tough reporting challenge trying to get information that we could use. And so we really relied on this intersection of academic literature, infrastructure data, and the habitat disruption data that we had assembled. And I cannot stress enough, and I used to teach at CUNY, and I used to tell students all the time, man, read the academic literature, because there's a ton of good story ideas, and there's also a lot of good data in there. And luckily, when I work with Deb, sometimes she gets out ahead of me on the subject matter because I'm coding or doing something else, doing some sort of stupid technical thing, and she knows the kind of thing that I'm looking for, and she can flag these things. But seriously, just read the academic literature and look for the data and look at the appendices and look at the supplementary data, because there's a lot of great stuff in there. And one good example was, I found this paper from Chinese scientists that had been widely cited that had mapped out the expansion of rubber plantations in Xishuangbanna, which was kind of a place that we had focused on. And I mean, it was great. And so that was something that if we had tried to do ourselves or something like that, it would have taken a really long time. And so again, just read the academic literature. And you can see this is kind of, how am I doing on time, by the way? Okay. Okay. So one of the things that you could see that we did here was, we tried to show how the rubber plantation had changed, and then a key sort of narrative device in our story was the construction of the high-speed rail that runs from the provincial capital of Kunming down to across Laos and into Vientiane. And so let me speed along here. And then there's unstructured data that you can find. And this was really key to us because we were able to locate the areas where Pasteur Institute scientists have found the closest known links to SARS-CoV-2 out in a remote place of Laos called Phuong. And we were able to visit where that was happening, or where they had the same places where guano farmers were harvesting bat guano up to their knees. And we were able to visit that because the supplementary data in the papers. And that allowed us to, I'll skip that, let's speed up a little bit. Really quick, if you aren't already, get familiar with OpenStreetMap, by the way, especially, again, if you are working in a place where you don't have a lot of, maybe, infrastructure data and things like that. Keep in mind it's user created, but, I was able to pull out the whole path of the rail line in Laos, and I'm so anal that I followed the whole thing along with the satellite imagery to make sure it was right, because it's user created, and it was. But you do want to kind of keep in mind, it's not a panacea, but it can often get you a lot farther than where we would be otherwise. And there are, in Python packages, that's where I'd really consider you to, or I'd really urge you to kind of put your effort, is because what you see on the web portal is like a fraction of what they have. And there's a ton of ways to extract that data and make it useful, and to wrangle it and do things with it. So I encourage you to kind of get familiar with like the under the hood of OpenStreetMap. In Brazil, that sort of represented this big black box of viral risk. We're doing so much damage to this vast forest, and there are many places that scientists have never been able to go and never been able to study. And one key element of that were roads. And I think this is a really important, in Brazil, we were lucky enough that we could get good data on highways. But, now there are also global data sets that have been, one is called the Global Road Inventory Project. And you can, it's pretty accurate. I mean, there are little roads that it misses, logging roads and things like that. But because I think roads are an important element of environmental destruction, I think this is really, and you can see, you've probably seen these types of graphics before about the Amazon, but you can see how the tree loss just kind of funnels out like fingers from the roads. So my admonition is, if you cover climate, invest in your data skills, because I don't know how it's just really hard, I think, to cover climate without being able to understand data. And if you already have some data skills, I would I mean, as you can tell, I'm really partial to maps and mapping because I think everything happens in a spatial way. And so learning mapping skills would be a tremendous way to up your game. We have incredible amounts of spatial data now that are available that can help you answer questions that maybe we couldn't answer before. I mean, sometimes, scientists aren't answering the questions that we want to answer. Maybe they're here and we're trying to be here. So the ability to do your own analyses and to look at some of these issues can be a real game changer. And the commercial satellite providers, Airbus now has 30-centimeter resolution imagery. I mean, you can see the tiniest of things, and you can work with these companies to get access to their data. And when you do get that data, if you have some mapping skills, it allows you, you go from just looking at a picture, here's a satellite image, to being able to layer multiple bits of data on top of that and to sort of intersect those things. So that's why I'm kind of harping on mapping skills, because I think it's just incredibly valuable. And then finally, I don't work for Google, but I think Google Earth Engine is probably one of the best journalistic tools to come along in a long time. And I don't mean Google Earth Pro. This is an actual way of it's an engine to process large amounts of satellite data. And I think about Matt Waite when he was at the Tampa Bay Times, and they did this series looking and used on no net loss of wetlands in Florida, and it took him all day to process, say, one image of Landsat data. Like, it was just an all-day thing. And now you can process entire Landsat catalogs dating back 30 years in seconds. So it's just an incredible resource. The learning curve can be a little, but you know, it's worth the investment. And it has a huge data catalog that allows like tons of environmental climate data. Like, I just encourage you to go and just look through the data catalog for story ideas because it's incredible. And then I include the resources here, which it'll be online. So I want to quit talking so somebody else can go.
Yeah, so my name is Frederick Mujira. So it is G, not J, Mujira. Yeah, you'll find it there. G pronounced as J. I do a lot of stuff to survive as a journalist, as a National Geographic Storytelling Explorer, and the founder for Water Journalists Africa. I'll later take you through, what we do at Water Journalists Africa and InfoNile, but I want to take you through a few things that I think are happening. If you as a journalist, probably, well, talking to journalists now, what was your first climate change impact story? We're looking at the climate change impact story. If you think about it, for example, you may not, talk about it, but what do you think was your first climate change impact story, and why do you remember it? Probably there are so many things that make you remember it. If I wanted to tell you an example of why I remember the first climate change story I did, about 15 years ago, 18 years ago, there was a river, small river, flowing through. So I live in one of the best places in the world. Yeah, a few kilometers you go to the equator, the west of my father's land is the Congo rainforest. You have so many lakes there. And then to the east, you have Lake Victoria. And then further to the north, you have River Nile. But you may think that we are close to rivers and lakes, so we don't face water shortage. So my first climate change story, the small stream that was going through my city dried up. And then this stream was going through a place where they were making local brew. When it dried up, the guy who was manufacturing local brew closed. And people, most of the people there, they used to sing so many traditional songs about the local brew, how it's good, how they enjoy it. But immediately when the river dried up, because this guy was getting a lot of water and stuff like that, he closed because he was not able to move to a river, walking to a far area to fetch water from a river. And then he closed. He later died, I think. You can see the impact of this story. Yeah, I remember it because with so many things. Maybe I enjoyed the brew. I don't know. Maybe, So there are so many factors that would make you think, remember, and, But I wanted us also to look at what climate change impact stories do journalists most often tell. And when you look through some of these newspapers, online, you find most of these stories focus on disaster-related, because these journalists do not want to dig deeper So then they aim at, writing stories that are disaster-related. Don't want to do further investigations. You know these stories, things of, floods and, what is happening. For example, in Libya, and you don't find stories that dig deeper. So when you ask yourself a question, what climate change impact stories need to be investigated? There are so many climate change stories. But what do you think about the climate change stories on nature, on biodiversity, for example? If we think, and this is true, if we think that nature is worth almost 100 billion US dollars to the annual world economy, and this is almost half of the world's GDP. Why don't we see more of these stories, like biodiversity stories, nature stories? Why do we wait to wait for the tide to kind of cease? Then we kind of go in, to talk about the stories of who has been, swimming naked. Why don't we tell these stories as early as possible? For example, stories around, the effect of climate change on biodiversity, the impact. I've been working on stories around the impact of climate change on the mountain gorillas. This is why I brought this one. This is a photo I took. This story was supported by the Earth Journalism Network. I went to an area in Uganda where mountain gorillas live, and I tracked gorillas and wanted to find out how they're affected by climate change. And you realize that mountain gorillas are moving from lower lands and then going up to the hills. And also, this is affecting tourism, but also bringing more conflicts between mountain gorillas and and also local communities. But also, before we go to the other slide, you can think about also small, what would look at small stories, the impact of climate change on, for example, amphibians. I've done a story also on amphibians in Uganda. There are about 80 to 100 amphibian species in Uganda. Most of them live close to areas near Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, and you find amazing stories when you pay attention to these what we would call small stories. And one of the things I found out was that there is a fungal disease that affects amphibians called Catridiomicosis. It's a fungal disease. So, with climate change, the disease-causing vectors are dying, and then you find now more amphibians now increasing in Uganda. You would look at it as an advantage of climate change. I really don't know, but also as climate change increases, you find people are encroaching on wetlands. That means they're encroaching on the habitats of amphibians, and most of amphibians are dying, as farmers encroach on their habitats. So Water Journalists Africa, Infonide, Water Journalists Africa is a network of journalists in Africa who report about water. We founded it in 2011. We are spread across 50 countries, and we are almost 1,200 journalists. We have regional editors that we work with, South, East, West, and also Central Africa. We have a flagship project called Infonide. Infonide is a geojournalism platform, and we are trained to do geojournalism by Earth Journalism Network. We've been doing this since 2015, when I was trained. And yeah, in 2017, I met with an American journalist. We started InfoNile, and InfoNile now works in the 11 countries in the Nile Basin. There are 11. There are 10 countries in the Nile Basin plus one. That one, the plus one is Eritrea, which is like an observer country. Yeah, so we work with journalists in there. We train them in geojournalism. We train them in, data journalism, and we link them with scientists. But also we have another small project called the Big Gorilla Story Project, which looks at stories of the big gorillas, of the mountain gorillas in Uganda, Rwanda, and Congo, and we train local journalists in those 3 countries to report on gorillas. Yeah, that is who we are. Remember at the beginning, the first slide you saw had something to do with collaboration. This is what I'm taking to. So our approach at InfoNile and Water Journalists Africa is that we identify a theme of common and cross-border importance that cuts across these countries I told you that we are in. We source for credible data. Because we work with coordinators who are in these countries, we source for credible data. And also we have scientists that we have in our network who give us clues of credible data. Then we call for pitches from journalists who are members of these networks. So we mentor them when we like their pitches, we take them on, we mentor them, and train them, and later, they publish their stories in their local languages. Some publish in local languages in different platforms, radio, TV, and stuff like that. And then later we get these stories after they have published them. We bring them together and create, cross-border multimedia projects that go with different geojournalism techniques, and also we create actionable interactive maps that go with these projects. So I was doing a background of this one. This is one of the projects we did about 2 years ago, and it was nominated for covering climate. Now, yeah, we didn't win. The awards, the winners were announced about 2 days ago, 3, but we were nominated. So this project looked at how lakes in the East African region are affected by climate change. So when we were working with our coordinators and journalists in the region, we realized that most of these stories were telling where our rivers are drying, our lakes are drying. So we wanted to come in and find out what is causing this. So as I talk, remember to not look at water as water drying, but also look at the biodiversity within these lakes. The amphibians, for example, like I told you, the frogs, the toads, and several other stuff that depend on these lakes and rivers. Yeah, so we wanted to come in and find out what was happening, so we worked with a group of journalists. We supported 7 journalists. We supported 14 journalists from 7 countries. We gave them grants, and we trained them in data journalism, and we mentored them. We usually work with our partner, Code for Africa, and then we make sure that they go and investigate in their countries. Look at different case studies of the lakes in their countries, what was happening to these lakes. Like I told you, we trained them, so we give them skills in data journalism. We made sure that they work with data wranglers from InfoNile and Code for Africa, and then they created different visualizations and maps that would go with these stories they were working on. Yeah. Yeah. So we engaged local communities as we were working on this project. We engaged the journalists, and we made, because you see, we are working in different countries, working with these journalists from different countries, we made sure we underlined the cross-border data, and supported these journalists. We analyzed the data and translated these stories into regional and local languages and published them, some of these on our website. Yeah, I'll just take you through what some of our visualizations looked like. So we mapped, we wanted to record fish occurrences in East Africa, and this is how we did it. Like I told you, we may not focus only on water reducing in these lakes, but also focus on resources within, pay attention to the resources within. The water resources, for example. We looked at fish in these lakes and we realized that fish was, they were reducing. And this does not only affect, the farmers, the fishermen on these lakes, but also it translates to what is happening to the governments, the regional governments, how much money they get from this. Yeah, if you read through, you realize what we did. So we looked also, this is another example of how our stories looked like, the impact of climate change on livelihoods in Lake Wamara in Uganda. And you realize that communities were going back to poverty because, originally they would depend on these lakes for a living. And now, they can't go in and fish and, stuff like that. Yeah. One particular type of fish called jipe was disappearing in Kenya. And we made sure that one of the grantees paid attention to what was happening. And we realized that, yes, it is true, this fish was disappearing. I'm almost through. Yeah, so one of there are some factors, of course, why these lakes are reducing, are shrinking, but the major one was climate change, so also resulting into seasonal flooding. Yeah, so there's so many lessons we learned. One of them is that, because remember, we're working in groups, we realized that, storytellers in media houses still choose to go it alone instead of collaborating. And you wonder why. Yeah, you talk, so many want to compete instead of collaborating. There's little or no exposure to collaborative journalism. In some countries, issues of transboundary resources are not open to the public. And it's very true, even when you go to, stories around River Nile, how it is covered by journalists in countries like Ethiopia and, Egypt, you find that these stories are so sensitive, and they're not open to the public. These issues. There's little budget to, take on expensive projects like these ones, and journalists usually want to concentrate on easy-to-report topics such as entertainment and politics, and do not want to do a lot of investigations. There's a lot of competition instead of collaboration, like I told you. Media houses want to compete instead of collaborating. Why is this approach important? It enables journalists and media houses to go beyond what they may be able to, what may not be able to achieve. When you give journalists grants and you train them and you empower them to do collaborative journalism, they are bound to, achieve what they are not able to achieve alone. Yeah, you see a lot of partnerships and networking opportunities, funding opportunity. We had to give them funds. Pitching, we trained them how to pitch. It was easy for them also to link to journalists and scientists, and because we have so many in our network, we mentored them and helped them to cut costs. About regional and global effects. So the story that we brought together had a regional effect instead of a national effect. Yeah, that's all I have. Yeah, thank you.
okay? Okay, good morning, everybody. So, okay, so we are so tired listening a lot of informations. Yeah. So good morning. I'm Shamsuddin Ilyas. I'm from Bangladesh. Actually, I'm from the ground, what she's telling you. And so I want to share my experience from the ground, how we can investigate the impacts of climate change issues. So I had some stories with some collaborative stories with our journalism network, Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting, and Journalism Found. So I want to share with you. So let's begin with a thought from one of my collaborative stories with Arthur Stewart, supported by Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting.
Across the country, people living in Bola, the largest island in Bangladesh, are preparing for the possible migration. Over the past 40 years, river currents strengthened by rising sea levels have devoured half of the island of Bola, leaving 500,000 people without a home. The erosion of Bola Island moved faster than expected, quickly engulfing homes into the river. Entire neighborhoods are starting to disappear in just days. In some areas of Bola, residents who lost over 500 neighbors are some of the last to leave. Agricultural skills cultivated and passed down from generation to generation are steadily declining with the uncertainty of the future.
আরো 10 মাইল দূরে আছে নদী নদী আমার একেবারে ঘরের কিনারে আইছে অনাইতে আইতে বাংতে আনতে নদীর কিনারে আইছে আমার ঘরের কিনারে আমার এত অর্থ সম্বন্ধ নাই যেন আমি কোথায় যাই না যাইয়া আমি যেন একটা ঘর বাড়ি করে নিয়ে নাই আমি নদীর মধ্যে খারাই মতন কই গিয়ে হে শক্তি নাই এবারে ভেঙে গেল
Chittagong, a city that receives thousands of climate migrants every year, in itself is struggling with its battle against sea level rise. Every day during high tide, water from the Bay of Bengal flows into the city streets, causing 70% of the city to go underwater. The daily high tide makes daily life an inconvenience for ordinary souls living in Chittagong. Water enters the homes of residents who can't afford to adapt but are forced to adjust the best way they can. Schools are impacted as well. Teachers have to adapt and keep their students focused while giving lesson plans as the water enters. Many wear sandals in hopes of not letting their shoes get ruined. Escaping the water completely is inevitable. Thus, their uniforms have to be frequently washed to rinse out the unsanitary water. The future and destiny of Bangladesh lies in the delicate balance of protecting our planet and the precious people living in it.
So what we saw in the film, the sea level rise are affecting the residents of coastal Bangladeshi people. So homes swallowed by the flood waters, river erosions, migrants from different parts of Bangladesh are moving to the cities of Dhaka, Chittagong, and other cities for safer ground. So what happens here? But the safer options, the safer grounds are also sinking, like the Chittagong city. So what is the impact of climate change or sea level rise? IPCC estimates that 5 millimeter in an average sea level rise per year in Bangladesh. But the Bangladesh government study found the double is 10 millimeter per year. In our recent studies on collaborative studies supported by Journalism Fund, we did the studies on sinking cities of 6 different cities, how the cities are sinking. In our investigations, we found that the coastal cities are also sinking 20 millimeter per year. What does it mean? It means Bangladesh is being affected not only by sea levels rise, but also by land subsidence. So this is a great problem we are facing. And by 2050, 17% of Bangladesh will be submerged underwater, and it will displace 20 million of people out of 167 million people of the country. So the climate change is costing 1% GDP of Bangladesh. So this is how alarming we found in our investigations. And to see what are the major impacts of climate change we are talking about in our country or from the ground, we can investigate into it. So the migration is a big problem now. We saw already why the people are migrating. People are migrating due to the loss of habitat, the homes, and what is the another causes? This is the salinity due to the sea water. Intrusions, salinity is increasing. In the last 35 years, the salinity has increased around 26%. By the 2050, it will be 55% salinity. It will increase to 55% on the ground. So what causes due to the salinity is huge health risks. And new diseases are spread out. And like dengue, now Dhaka is struggling with. Every day, 10 to 20 people are dying due to the dengue. Just a mosquito bite you and you will die. So this is happening. And what is the another causes? There is a great risk of our food. Food is under threat now because 25% of Bangladesh are coastal land. So we cannot grow fruit in these areas. So another things, we are losing biodiversity. Who are telling about Frederick. So I'm telling you details in later slide and frequent flood. So you see the cities are going underwater and every day. And the extreme weather, extreme events are increasing, drought, cold waves, many things. So what is the migration here? So we see people are migrating from different places of the coastal areas to the cities. But it is not now only limited in the Bangladesh. People also migrating to the USA, Europe, and other countries from Bangladesh due to the sea level rise. So it is not affecting us only, affecting the whole world now. So how many people are migrating to the cities? Every day we estimate that 2,000 people are moving to the Dhaka cities. Of them, 70% people are climate migrants. So what they are doing there in the cities? So if you see, there are new climate migrant slums are going in the city. So it also named after them, like there is an island called Shondip. So you will get the Shondip island. We call it Shondip Para. People are living, all the migrants are living together. So there is limited access to education, healthcare facilities, as they are suffering from poverty because they lose everything. They lost everything and moved to the city. So there is rages of criminal activities, trafficking, and women and children are the most affected people here. So to track the migration issues, how you can investigate on how you can get the data, I have used here some important links, and also I used my tip sheets. You will get those informations to tracking the migration issues in Bangladesh, like Pakistan and the Global South as well. So I'm telling about you the salinity. So why? What is salinity? How we are affecting it? See, in our land, you see 102 million hectares of land. We are a very small country. So is still, we cannot cultivate there due to the level of salinity here is 16 deci per meter. But Bangladesh is working hard to discover saline tolerant variant. Still, our focus is we invented the saline tolerant variant. It is 12 deci per meter still. So still many lands are like, we cannot cultivate there. So salinity, what I'm telling you, is causes the reproductive health of women, men. Women are suffering from different diseases in our country. And there is also a mental health problem as well as rising the mental health diseases in our country. So the salinity also creates a huge shortage of drinking water. Around 20 million of people in Bangladesh and basically in coastal areas still don't have proper access to drinking water. And due to the saline water, our industries are also greatly suffering who needs huge water for their plant. So I want to give you an example how we investigate the loss on biodiversity. See, look at the picture. What the image comes to your mind is definitely the buffaloes are suffering from infertility, malnutrition, and frequently illness. Why? Due to the saline increases in their grazing land. See the land, there is nothing for grazing due to the salinity. So, the impact of salinity, rising seas are affecting their health and reproductive health. This is an example of buffalo, but it is for everything in the coastal area. So if the buffalo population has fallen, so what happens in the coastal areas? In our investigation, it's found that in the last 2 decades, around 60% of buffalo, the population of buffalo has fallen. So the buffalo was the main sources of protein in the coastal people, for the coastal people. And huge people was involved in buffalo rearing. So when the buffalo population has fallen, so they lost their job, their professions. What they're doing, they're cultivating salt now because the salt has increased huge in our country now. So after fall of the buffalo populations in the coastal area, what happens? The rises of import in the 10 years, 168%. So what is the impact of agriculture, what I'm telling you? So I need to go rush. That's why here is everything. So our 25% of production has come from the coastal areas. It is completely under threat now due to the rising salinity, sea level rise, how the sudden flood affected the crops. And now I want to share you some information how you will investigate on the impacts of climate change in the ground. So it is very difficult to getting the data to connect with the ground. So we are thinking here from the Europe, the large media in the Europe and USA, but from the local ground, we must need to collecting data from the ground to get the real impact, what I showed you, and gathering information through network. This is a collaboration, and tracking records of hospitals in individual hospitals, the rise of diseases and new diseases and trend of diseases, you will get there. We have the records in our country. And tracking increasing the new climate migrants in the cities. In every city has a officer who is called the slum officer. So he's tracking the all data for the climate migrant slums and the other slums as well. So we have the climate plan as well. We spend money, how we can do this, and what is the adaptation plan, what is the mitigation plan, how are we struggling, how much we are spending. There is everything there. For doing this ground story, a reporter must go to these documents and data as well. So here I am. If you need any further information, you can please feel free to contact me. And if you have any questions, I'm here. Thank you.